Our Tutor, things you wanna ask me, anything will do. We're all at home too, and all around the world with you.
Secret weapon. Before you do any performance, eat a banana. It's amazingly nutritious and good for you. It fills you full of energy. And before I do broadcasts, performances, anything, I eat a banana. Can't beat it. To build up focus, I think what all of us have got to do is we've got to practice concentration. Practice concentration. And I fortunately can immerse myself in the music to such an extent. Honestly, the roof could fall in. Hope that doesn't happen. The roof could fall in and I wouldn't notice.
I think the most important thing is to be present in the moment. So I know that we all have a tendency, well, okay, maybe we don't, but I for sure have a tendency in the middle of a performance to be like, I wonder what my pal who's in the audience thinks of this. Or worse things like, should have gone to the loo, or wonder what I'm going to have after the concert is over. Go grab some food and all that. So how do I avoid those things? I think it's about communication. So you're always communicating as you're playing with your audience, but also with the people you're playing with. And that really helps to draw me back in. So eye contact is super important with the people I'm playing with. And just, really digging into the music and enjoying it for what it is. I think the other thing with that is to approach every performance seeking something new from the piece. So when you're practicing, don't just be practicing completely mindlessly, but try to be practicing as mindfully as you can. And exactly the same goes for performance. So try out different fingerings. Try it out in a concert. The worst thing that can happen is it goes wrong. And for sure that is going to bring a freshness to when you play in public. Of course, there's a tipping point with that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare. But it's almost like you should be so prepared that you can still be experimenting when you're in concert.
This is where, for me, yoga really comes in handy. So I do a lot of yoga, both taking classes and self-guiding in my practice. And I would say that all of the components of yoga, be it balance or breathing through a really difficult posture, sustaining something, finding my edge, cultivating those skills on the mat have really helped me in the practice room and on stage. I'll think to myself with my instrument, I held this really hard balancing posture on one leg for almost a minute. Surely I can get to the end of this tiny little passage without losing my focus. Breathing also really helps me. If I can encourage myself to breathe mindfully through an entire phrase, whether it's in the heat of performance or just in the practice room, the breath is the broth, as it will, that connects everything. If you've got the soup of your body, the task at hand, your mind, your emotions, breathing is the thing that connects it all together. It's the broth that holds all the ingredients of the soup. So I would say that breathing definitely helps me maintain focus no matter how nerve-wracking the situation. And just reminding myself that I have held more difficult things. I have sustained more difficult things for far longer, and I can do it.
Definitely my strategy is to have a careful plan of how you want to organize the practice. So before I start practicing, I have a clear plan in my head of what I want to achieve, and this helps me stay focused. If I find that my mind is starting to drift off, I will move to another passage, or I'll move to another work, or I might just even play an exercise. And in performance, it's very different because there's a lot of adrenaline flowing, and that helps to keep me really alert. And I don't struggle so much with focus in performance, but I do take care with how I prepare for that performance. So I spend a lot of time building up that mental stamina. So I will first hear phrases through my head, then I will hear larger passages, then I'll hear sort of the exposition, start building it up like that through my head with the music and then without the music. It's important for me to have a clear understanding of the work I'm playing, both musically and structurally, and then I'm able to totally immerse myself in what it is I want to say, so my interpretation. And that moment where I'm focused so much on the interpretation is a moment that I'm able to just follow the sound and stay focused.
Well, I think most people would say that in concert it's actually usually not a problem. That's not to say you can't be put off by things, but my experience is that if I'm well prepared and I know the score inside out, I've spent time at the piano with all the different parts and I'm absolutely inside the piece, then my focus is solely on that. Having said that, of course, nerves always play a part in different ways, different halls. You can never predict how it's going to affect oneself. And I remember a masterclass that Yo-Yo Ma gave, and he gave a fantastic tip. And yes, even Yo-Yo Ma gets nervous. He said that what he tries to do is he tries to focus on one of the furthest most points in the hall that he's playing in, and of course that could be somewhere vast, 3,000-seater hall, and he tries to just focus his energy and his sound towards that point. And for him it's a sort of almost like a kind of Zen experience. And that's not to say that projection is about playing louder, it's just about focus. In terms of practice, that's a whole different issue. And for me, the most important things are, first of all, that with your practice, you're organised. You know exactly what you want to achieve in the time that you've got and how you're going to do that. So, for instance, when I was a student and I had hours ahead of me each day, a bit like now, I would boil everything down hour by hour and even 20 minutes by 20 minutes. Whether it be scales, studies, Bach, concerto sonatas. Now it's a very different thing, and you will find that when you get into the music profession that you have very little time to practice, and often it's snatched moments here in a hotel room or backstage in a hall. And it's very important that you know exactly what you want to achieve with that time that you have to practice. Yes, of course, you have to have some time just to enjoy yourself, but actually practice is about improving and absorbing and learning. So always have a plan. And the other really important thing, and this wasn't an issue when I was a student, but don't practice in a room with a mobile phone, with any sort of screen. Any sort of thing can put you off. I love practicing with lots of books around me. Whatever, but keep mobile phones out of it. And I think, just be structured. That's the most important thing for me.
Well, I'm just going to start with practice, I guess. And the main thing about practice is, in your practice space, is to try and create a really calm and focused place for yourself. So the first thing I would do is take away any distractions. Like if there's a TV, make sure it's off. If there's obviously radio, anything sound-wise off. I'd take your phone out of the room, put it on airplane mode. I'd make sure you close your computer so you can't see a screen of any sort. Airplane mode is great, and silence, and so just create that lovely space to practice. And then I guess before you sit down, or as you sit down, you can think about the things that you need to focus on. So if you've had a lesson recently, or you've had a teacher speak to you about things in your playing, you can decide that that's the focus of today. Maybe you'll have thought of trickier passages that you know you need to look at. So that's another. So just set aside some goals. But I think the main thing about practicing and maintaining focus is that if you're really listening, so practice for me is about listening. It's all very well to have directions and ideas of what you should be doing, but if you're not listening to the outcome and making sure that you're on the right track, because essentially everything that you're thinking about should come out in the sound. So just keep adjusting your thoughts and goals according to what you're hearing. So if you're really listening, I feel like that takes up so much of your brain space that there's no chance you'll get distracted. And as for performance, maintaining focus in performance, I think obviously there's a lot to do with prep, but during the performance itself, I think the thing is, if you're prepared as much as you can be, then it takes away any sense of panic. So really, I think it's about preparation. So if you can be as prepared as you can possibly be, then somehow you have, there's a sense of calmness about going into performance. Try and forget the physical discomforts of something that's not to do with the music. Any stray thoughts of, oh, I wonder if my parents came in, they got their tickets okay, things like that. Try and let go of that. And the main thing is to focus on the music, because essentially that's what you're there for, is you're there to deliver the music and to tell a story. So try and enter the story of what you're trying to tell, and I think if you focus on the music, everything else kind of pales. So it's much easier to focus. I don't know if that makes sense. So there is a very special place that exists, and it's that place between being in the moment of playing the music and delivering in the moment of the story, but also it's like when you're thinking ahead to something that you know to have practiced. So to make those things possible, it might be a position thing. So it's a really special place that exists between that thing of being in the moment and that thing of thinking a little bit ahead. And I guess that really only comes with experience. So I guess what I'd say to you is just try and perform more. Just get yourself the experience and do lots of performing.
Super tutor, things you wanna ask me, anything will do. We're all at home too, and all around the world with you.
The hardest thing for me in terms of seeking improvements in my own playing is the time factor. And you could say, well, I'm struggling to find the time, but the reality is I'm struggling to make the time. And if something is as important to you as this, then you will make the time, and that's just a fact. So for me, my regular teaching job means that I get home a little bit later and then I want to relax, and really my own selfishness means that I don't get up early enough to practice in the morning when I know that that's the best time to do it. The opposite side of the coin is that with having less time to play with, I believe that my practice is a lot more focused. Okay, it's very often deadline driven with a concert or performance coming around the corner, but for sure that helps to focus the mind. And going back to the first question about how to maintain focus, having a concert just around the corner will definitely do that. The other most helpful thing in terms of structuring my practice is to make a list the night before. So I've put that in one of my tutorial videos for the intermediate cellos, but just writing a little task list of here are the things that I want to tackle. So I'm not just sitting down with a blank slate when I come to practice, but that I'm being really targeted in what I'm looking at. And if you set yourself short-term, medium-term and long-term goals, that gives you something to refer back to and also something to hold yourself accountable to. And you could even ask one of your friends to kind of buddy up with you on that. Both set your goals and then you can help each other and say, how are you getting on with that thing? That may be something helpful for you.
Well, I think that listening is absolutely the key. So I go to as many concerts as I possibly can. I try and hear as many inspiring people that as I can. And essentially, I think the desire to improve only comes from being inspired. I don't think I would inspire myself to improve, if you know what I mean. So when I hear people that I admire, I just want to be more like that, or at least I want to be able to do that for myself. So that's the drive one needs to get yourself back in the practice room. So that's what I'd recommend, is really going to hear as many concerts, live concerts, as you can. And beyond that, also in your daily life, try and surround yourself by musicians that you admire. Excuse me. So try and play with people that you admire and learn from them while you're playing. So essentially, try and hear as much as you can, get inspired, and surround yourself with inspiring people.
One of the best things about leaving conservatory, even though it can be quite painful and unsettling at the time, is that I actually notice this in other people's playing. When they leave school, the incredible growth in people's playing simply by not having to answer to someone else. That sounds bad, but what I mean is people stop seeking approval for every little decision they make. You know, when you're in regular lessons, you do the best you can, you prepare to the best of your ability, but you always go in and you wait for your teacher to say something, either in approval or disapproval, or, you know, they steer things in a different way. But when you stop having regular lessons, you have to take ownership of your playing and of your musical decisions. And whether you like them or not, you have to believe in them, and your decisions might change in a day or a week or a year, but when you're presenting them on stage or to other people, you have to believe in the musical decisions you've made. So I love the subtle changes, actually sometimes not so subtle changes, that happen in people's playing when they really start owning their playing. They stop seeking approval and they stop apologizing for what they've dreamt up.
The first thing I'd say is that it's always good to try and surround yourself with people, musicians who inspire you, musicians who you can always learn from, pick up things, ask questions. One of the things that that frustrates me sometimes about the music profession is that we have a little sort of taboo that we can't show weakness, can't sort of, you know, if there's something that's bothering us, actually go and seek out advice. Singers do it all the time. Singers have teachers right throughout their careers. We don't, but I think we need to always keep that sort of mentality that there's always part of a student in us. I think it's also important that, in fact, this is something that one of the cello professors at the Royal Academy where I studied, Mats Lidström, I didn't actually study with him, but I spent many hours talking about music, and he said to me, you always have to have a project of your own that keeps you interested and focused. Yes, you'll be doing things for this group, that group, this orchestra, but actually if you have your own soul focus as well, that can be incredibly nourishing. And I think also the nice thing about, well, one of the few nice things about getting older is that you realise that actually you learn from every generation. So when I left college, I was working predominantly with people who were always older than me. Then you get to a certain stage where it changes. You're working with people of younger generations, and you learn, you get just as much from them, fresh ideas. And it's that exchange of ideas that I think is so important. I'd also say it's very important to be able to take your head out of the sort of mélange of all things musical and just read as much as you can, whether it's books on music. For instance, I'd say if you haven't read the 2 books that Nicholas Harnoncourt wrote on music, you need to go and do that. But all sorts of things, whether it's letters of Beethoven, Schnabel's, diaries, that's something that is also yes, it doesn't necessarily help you solve any technical problems with your instrument, but it brings a sort of more global perspective to one's music making. And then when it comes to specific technical improvements, well, I think there's a misconception sometimes that we're going to arrive at a point where we've got everything solved And that never happens. Partly because as we get older also our bodies change, and we have to know how to adapt, and we have to use our ears to know how to adapt. So we need to always know what we want, how to realise what we want, and actually adapt technically, and always have when you come back to repertoire, that's something that's very important for me, that you can remember from the last performance the things that you weren't quite happy with, the things that could have been better, and you'll find that as you evolve, things slot into place, and also things that maybe professors might have said in a masterclass or in a lesson, sometimes the penny doesn't drop till 10, 15 years later, and that's fantastic. And it's also important to keep that idea when you're teaching yourselves, that students might not necessarily be able to react straight away, but maybe quite a few years later, what you said to them will have a really quite profound effect. So just, as I said, surround yourself with people and projects that sort of keep the fire lit.
Initially it was daunting when I completed my studies, but actually I soon found that having that extra time and space to focus on my playing and explore the repertoire was hugely liberating, and definitely a period of growth both musically and technically. Now I find that as I continue to build my repertoire and learn and study new works, my playing continues to develop. I do from time to time exercises, and sometimes revisit some of Kreutzer studies depending upon what it is I'm wanting to develop in my playing. I also try to do scales each day, so I'll work on 4-octave scales, arpeggios, thirds, sixths, octaves, fingered octaves, tenths, and the way in which I do these all depends upon how much time I have to practice.
Okay, I left the conservatoire in 1972, a long, long time ago. And quite honestly, my technique, in jazz world we call this our chops, my technique now is better than it was as a student, because I do regular practice, I do scales, but I don't do the same scales all the time. I make it as interesting as possible for myself, and I always give myself a challenge, and I always practice with a metronome, and I challenge myself with that metronome, and I get to the point where I could chuck it out of the room, but for me it's the motivator to enable me to get better.
Super tutor, things you wanna ask me, anything will do. We're all at home too, and all around the world with you.
I hate memorizing, honestly. When I think about what makes me the most nervous for a concert, it is always something having to do with memory. So if I'm playing a concerto, I'm just more nervous than I would be if I were playing a recital piece, because the expectation is that I will do this whole thing from memory and not forget a single note. For me, I find that worrying about memorizing will often take me out of the bigger picture, which is communicating something beautiful to my audience, communicating a shared experience. So if I'm only concerned about, oh my gosh, what comes next, it takes my attention away from making a beautiful sound or taking risks in a phrase, doing something unexpected, because what if I lose my place? So to be totally honest with you, I have started using music a whole lot more in performance, even with concertos, even pieces that I know and everyone knows. It just makes me feel better, not to be buried in the score, but to have it there for reference, should I need it. That being said, it is an important skill to cultivate, memorizing things. And I would say the bigger the piece, the smaller the chunks you want to break it down into. I would say just go phrase by phrase first, playing it. Obviously, familiarity is probably the best key to memorizing something. The more you internalize something in your muscles, in your mind, in your heart, it's going to stick. But just break it down, find creative ways of entertaining yourself with the music so that it's not stuff you want to forget. And then at those little forks in the road that throw you off, you can either like put a little symbol or a drawing in your music, something to jog your memory. Maybe think of a word that jogs your memory at that point so that you know, oh yeah, this is the part of the music where I think potato and then I remember what comes next. Or just find little devices to keep yourself engaged. Also breathing, it always comes back to breathing. So those I would say are my best techniques for memorizing when I do it.
I have to admit that when I was younger, when I was a student especially, I never really gave much thought to memorising. I didn't find it difficult because I had the luxury of being able to practice a lot. I love practicing. And I had to practice a lot to technically learn these pieces like Elgar, Dvorak, Schumann concertos, the sort of standard repertoire, the Bach suites, the Britten suites. So actually I memorized things because I practiced so much, because the muscle memory meant that it just, everything kind of got inside, you know, and even if something went wrong up here in the thought process, usually this would keep working. Now, the only thing about that is, as I've got older, I've found memorizing has become much harder and something that actually does scare me a little bit now, because I don't have to necessarily practice as much to learn a new piece, because of course as we evolve, our technique evolves and we can learn things quicker. Also, I don't have as much time to learn things now. So it's definitely an issue for me now, and I find that I have to. It's interesting actually, because I know now if I know something really properly from memory, because if I haven't spent time at the piano really learning all the parts to a piece, even if I've just learnt my part well, I will feel scared that I'm going to forget something. I've had that experience in the last couple of years learning a concerto that I hadn't learnt when I was younger, the second concerto Saint-Saëns, and I had to learn it at quite short notice. And in the end, I actually just used the music because I didn't want to compromise anything that sort of musical because of a fear of losing my place. And I would say that if you have a problem memorizing, there's nothing wrong with having the music there in front of you. It doesn't, yes, I find with certain pieces, certainly with Bach and Britten, there's a certain liberty not having the music there, but always practice with the score there, because you will always find new things. Something that Harnoncourt said, which I keep with me, is that even sometimes just sitting with a score, just staring at the text, you find new things, even if you're not at your instrument. And also get to a piano, even if you can't play the piano well, so that you can formulate how everything works in a sort of geographical way. You can see everything where you can't see the notes when you're playing a string instrument. So try and do some work away from your own actual instrument. Do some work when you're traveling as well. That's one of the most effective ways of memorizing something. But also, if it is a real fear, don't sacrifice the music. Just use the score.
Well, I guess like any big project, any big task, you just have to break it down into smaller, manageable, bite-sized chunks, and just do it little by little. Be slow and calm with yourself. It can get very frustrating when you keep forgetting. You know, you think you've memorized it and then you forget, and the next time you go through, you've forgotten it. But that's not a problem. I remember a good friend of mine saying to me years ago, and it was about my failure to remember people's names. And I'd really give myself a hard time about, oh, I know this person very well, but I've forgotten their name. And she said to me, listen, don't worry, you're allowed. You're allowed to forget someone's name 7 times before it gets embarrassing. So basically, I've given myself a break on that. And it's perfectly fine to forget, because you have to forget to remember. So yeah, be kind, be gentle, be steady about it, and before you know it, you will definitely have reached the end, and you'll have memorized the whole thing, and it'll give you such pleasure.
Okay, I'll tell you the truth. I don't, because I don't play large pieces. Most of the time I improvise. But in order to improvise, if I'm going to play a tune, say Summertime, Stella by Starlight, Autumn Leaves, something like that, I learn the bass line, I learn the harmony, I learn the tune, and I then practice playing these three important constituents all round all the 12 keys, so that when I come to play, hey, I don't have to think about it. It's just all there. And it's very nice when folks say, you know, he sits at the piano, he makes it look so easy. Yeah, it is easy if you spend a lifetime practicing, but it's fun, and it's always interesting and challenging.
For me, a lot depends upon how much time I have. So if I have maybe a month and it's a concerto, I will first play it through from beginning to end with the music, and then I will, so that I identify the most challenging passages, I will then, though, gradually, segment by segment, phrase by phrase, start to memorize it. I think for me what's important is understanding the structure. So if I've got the structure, map out the structure in my head, then it becomes very easy to sort of memorize the sections and then sort of connect them. So there's a lot of practice initially with the score, obviously, and then with the instrument and without the score. And then I will spend a lot of time just sitting with the score, just hearing it through in my head. Initially small sections, then larger sections, then finally the complete work. And then I know when I've got it really well and truly memorized, when I can hear it from beginning to end in my head without the score. And I often do that when I'm out jogging. I'm just hearing the music through in my head. And what's amazing about that is that it pretty much stays with you.
Immerse yourself in the music. Listen to it a lot. Sing it in your head when you are preparing dinner. Sing it in your head when you are about to go to sleep. Get lots of recordings of it. Just really immerse yourself in it. And I think I got quite good at memorising large pieces by being really lazy and not wanting to get my music out of the case or out of my bag. So you could try that, you know, just like start one day and see how far you get through the thing until you're like, okay, that's where I get stuck. Yeah, that's what's been helpful for me. I'm not necessarily saying it's the right answer, but that's what's worked for me in the past.